My name's Bill Carico. I'm running for governor of Virginia as a write-in candidate. I'm talking to you today about some things that are going to go against the traditional politicians. I've come up with a plan on how we can actually take back the country. It could have a ripple effect starting in Virginia, and then it could impact people all over the country, because depending upon how this particular governor's race turns out, we could either gain ground in our fight against all the evils that are trying to overtake us, or we could lose ground. In order for me to be elected governor, I need 3 million people to hear this and reevaluate where we are as a nation and realize that we really do have a shot if 3 million people will write my name in on the ballot. You see, the write-in ballot gives us an opportunity to throw the bums out whenever the political machines get too powerful. And I think there's a political monopoly right now in our country, and that both parties are corrupt. Recently, I was talking to Sidney Powell, and she's somebody I respect deeply. I think her work representing General Flynn is exceptional, and what she ran into was the same types of things that was used to railroad my daughter and get her sentenced almost 20 years without parole as a first-time nonviolent offender. A softball mother of 3 was accused and coerced to confess for burglaries. They charged her with burglaries in 5 counties. The coercion is captured on 3 hours of video that I have. We'll be releasing that because we're making a documentary about her story. But again, through all of that, it's taken us 7 years to get to this point. And along the way, in 2016, she'd been fighting in the criminal justice system for 2 years. And I was riding home one night. I'd missed an airplane flight. I turned around and was coming back. And I realized that God might want me to run for governor. I'd started early when she was arrested trying to figure out how to change the criminal justice system. And I realized that it was going to take forever. And then it dawned on me, well, we can start changing things if we go from the top. And that's where the notion came to me. President Trump had just been elected. I realized that there's an element in the country that is absolutely fed up and happens to be the majority, and the silent majority. The reason that President Trump, I think, ran into great difficulty is that he was connected to his voters pretty much in a one-way communication where he relied heavily on Twitter. And then when those communications were taken away, he lost his ability to communicate effectively. And I thought to myself, well, we need a two-way communication system. And especially if things continue to go bad and we wind up in a society where we have very little freedoms, or we have tyrants running things. If we still have communications, we need to establish them now. So I've created a communications network called X4. The X4 comes from the Greek letter chi, and the Greek letter chi is shorthand for Christ. People took offense when people started writing Xmas, thinking or even claiming that people were trying to take the Christ out of Christmas. But X has always been shorthand for Christ. And it was really just writing in shorthand to say Merry Xmas. Well, when the Internet Gold Rush started, I felt led to register X4. It was available. And the communications package I'm offering is based on 2 different types of two-way communication. One is vertically, we need to have two-way communications with God. We pray and we speak to God. We read His Word and He speaks to us. And in that setting, you have a two-way communication. And also we need horizontal two-way communications between like-minded people. And so we're setting up the X4 Coalition. And it's something that you can go to x4.com and you'll see both about my campaign and an opportunity to communicate through the coalition. My life since the 2020 election, again, shifted. I was thinking I'm supposed to run for governor. I was planning to run straight up. I was going to be a candidate. I have people in my world, I call it my orbit, who are both Democrats and Republicans and independents. I have believers and non-believers. I think that God brings people across our path. I think He directs our steps. And my life verse is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I consider that my foundational verse, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths." And it's interesting in this world and age of information and intellect that God would challenge us to lean not on our own understanding. That makes for a real interesting journey. And so I ask whether you believe in providence or coincidence, and I believe in providence, that every event is providential. Every event is providential. The story that we recorded, and you'll see the video, was how I met Dr. Chris Wilson. And I was on my way to Newport News to compete in the USTA District Championships. It's something that I've been doing for many, many years. And we go down and play for a weekend in the heat, and people think we're insane, but it's a big physical test. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fellowship involved. And through the years, my wife Patty and I have met a lot of interesting people. We met a couple who are involved in a church down in Carrollton, across the James River from Newport News. We called them when we knew we were headed down there, and we said, "Where do you want to eat?" And they said, "Well, let's eat at Salsa's in Newport News." We said, "Okay." And then we called to book our room, and all the rooms were booked. We couldn't find anything in Newport News. So we wound up finding a place, but I called them back and I said, "Hey, we don't need to go downtown in Newport News. That place is going to be a zoo, and I don't want to spend our time together trying to get into a restaurant that's probably going to be crowded." And they said, "Fine, call us when you get close tomorrow." And so we went to bed, we woke up, we packed. We had a little drive across the state from where we were. The morning that we got up to leave for Newport News, Patty was almost ready and getting a few last things, and I sat down in the chair and looked up at the TV, and there was a commercial on. And there was a young man talking about his life in prison and how he'd become a minister, had just gotten pardoned. It had all the things that you'll hear about in the video. And I thought to myself, that man's been pardoned. We need to try to get a pardon for my daughter. We had difficulties. As a matter of fact, we had just been turned down by the pardons office on my daughter just 2 months before. They actually sent the notice and the response to a wrong address. So we went months not hearing from them because they had mailed things to the wrong address. I mean, I have to smile, but it's just typical state bureaucracy. But when we got the letter, it said, "Your request for pardon's been denied, and you can apply again in 3 years." And actually, that might be why we're talking today, is because they denied her request for pardon. And here I am, I'm needing to make my decision in July, and we go to Newport News. We decided we're not going to this restaurant downtown. We call my friends and I say, "Hey, we're close, where do you want to meet?" And he says, "Well, Teresa hurt herself and she's at the eye doctor, so we still need to meet at that same restaurant." He said, "You got to come pick me up and we'll meet her. She's already down there." It's okay, we'll head downtown. So here we are, we had tried to change the location, and we're sitting at that restaurant. It wasn't crowded. We come outside and we tried to find a place to sit down, but the businesses weren't open to that. So we wound up walking around the corner, and here's this beautiful fountain, city pond, right in the center of Newport News. They call it the city center. And we walked up to a juice bar, and there was one table on this big area of bricks, and we sat down. And I'm a camera guy, I love to take pictures. And I looked up, and there was only one couple walking by. It was a good distance away. And I said, "Hey, can you get a picture of us?" Held up my camera. And after a few steps, I looked, and that was the guy I'd seen on TV that I thought I need to talk to. So walking toward me was Dr. Chris Wilson, the man who was on TV that I'd seen. And I realized, oh, we're supposed to be here. I wonder what God's going to do now. And actually, God's done so many miraculous things that I was completely calm about it. I just thought, wow, God's really showing me something here. I'm a big person on math and probabilities. One of my favorite explanations of odds is people who believe that life could have started by chance. One of my favorite Christian speakers is, now he died recently, Ravi Zacharias. Life started by chance is the same probability of 50,000 people coming to a football game and sitting down in alphabetical order. And you think about that. And so now I want you to think about what were the odds that I'm watching TV in Southwest Virginia and I see a face and I make a note, I need to talk to that guy. And a few hours later, I'm talking to him in Newport News. Turns out he's also from Southwest Virginia. And so that even increases the odds even further. I mean, if he lived in Newport News, and that's what God has been giving me, is this type of just kind of reassurance that he can do anything. And he can even raise up 3 million voters in 2. And I want to just bring attention around to you and realize if you're listening to these words right now, I think it's providential. Because you have an opportunity in the next couple of weeks to go out and gather and help me get my message out. You have an opportunity to make a difference because with 3 million votes, we will easily not just take back the governor's race when the voting ends, but we will be able to clean house in the midterm elections. We will be able to put, with 3 million people who are connected through export.com, two-way communications, we can start a new era of politics in Virginia. And Virginia can lead the nation. Sitting here today, the path that God has directed includes access to 5 billionaires who are professing patriots. You let that sink in a minute. I didn't know any billionaires. And now I know 5. I'm not looking to them for a single thing. God brought somebody to me right before I had to make some election or make some decisions about running for governor, and one of them was a former campaign chairman for a presidential candidate. And I thought, oh, wow, God's directing my path, and here he brings me somebody who's familiar with running a presidential campaign. I thought, man, that's exciting. And then he brought me somebody who'd run a gubernatorial race and actually turned a state that was blue, turned it red. And these were people that God brought to my house. And then at one point God said, no, we're not going to do it this way. At that point I called this the Gideon campaign. And it's really a long... This last year I was with a man at the top of the Trump Tower in Las Vegas. And I looked around and as we were talking about other things, again, I just thought, you know, God, you directing my steps sure is an interesting journey. And I sure don't understand all of this. And so it's a real stretch of faith when you give thanks that people might be trying to hurt you. People seem to be your enemy. God's allowing that to happen. But through the prison ministry, we hear lots of stories, and we always lead them to Christ. I've done videos on how to become a believer and how to lead people to Christ, because I think God wants us all to not just get saved, but to become ambassadors for Christ. The first 2 political videos I made, the first one was how I became pro-life. And you'll find that on my website. That's the first one you'll see. Because running for governor, I want to be a person of impact in this holocaust of the unborn. And of course, because of my pro-life position, I wanted to change all the Democratic leaders in this bogus claim that a dead child coming out of a decision that a mother makes is not a single choice of the woman's health care. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But if you look at our country right now, the extreme leaders who are in charge of the Democratic Party have made the most dangerous place to be in America is in the mother's womb. Abortion is an abomination, and the people who can't see that, sometimes it's because they're spiritually blind. And so the way to reach them is to get them saved so that the Holy Spirit can lead them and lead their thinking, and their mind can be renewed. And that's basically the best and quickest way to win this war. My job as a minister is more now jail ministry, prison ministry. And of course evangelism, if you're on my path, I assume that God wants me to lead you to Christ. And I challenge you to think that way too. I mean, why not? God is so powerful and mighty, and I just trust him with that. And so my stories over the last few years include lots of stories about leading people to Christ in a matter of minutes, because I know he's prepared them. That changes how we think about things. If God brings someone to you and you think he's prepared them then it changes how you think. A man was advertising a 30-foot ladder, and I needed a 30-foot ladder. And I called him on it. It was on Facebook. He says, yeah, I got it. I can deliver it. Where do you want it? I thought, thank you, God. Until he's driving up the driveway, and he's in a little mid-sized car with the ladder sticking out the back. And I said, that ain't no 30-foot ladder. And rather than get upset, I thought, oh, God probably wants me to lead him to Christ. 10 minutes later, he was praying the prayer of salvation with me. I did buy the ladder that he had, and I've been using it. So, you know, we need to trust God for these things. When what looks like a setback, we need to take a step back and say, wait a minute, I wonder how God's going to use this. And I'm here to tell you that the last 7 years with our daughter in prison, her strength is just exemplary because she's a woman of faith. She's mighty in the Spirit. You're going to find those 3 hours of where they were railroading her, you're going to be impressed. And you'll be outraged. If I win governor, Governor Northam might even get his attention. Maybe he'll pardon her before I need to. Maybe we can get her out of prison. What we've learned from this is how corrupt the criminal justice system is, to the core. I read Bonhoeffer, the version by Eric Metaxas, the New York Times best-selling author. I was to the part where Bonhoeffer was in Hitler's prisons, the Gestapo prisons. And leading up to that, I just became so impressed with his faith that I actually prayed a prayer and asked God, is my faith anything like Dietrich Bonhoeffer's? The reason I say that is that my dad left home when I was 15. We didn't know anybody who was without two parents. We were in a time in 1966 where our family structure was a lot different, a lot stronger. And I wound up having to go from being a 15-year-old kid, totally interested in whether his hair looked good before he left for school, to counseling a mother who was badly broken because my dad had cheated on her. And I became her support. I cried out to God, are you real? And he answered. I used to tease people that I had a drug problem. When I was growing up, my parents drugged me to church. And it was during those playoff games between the Packers and the Colts in the fourth quarter, and I had to go to MYF. I mean, there was a serious drug problem. But all kidding aside, I started taking my faith seriously, but I didn't have a foundation. So when I was reading Bonhoeffer's book, and here's a man who's in Gestapo prison and how he was responding was phenomenal, I said, God, is my faith anything like Bonhoeffer's? 3 days later, I get a call, Dad, I've been arrested. You can read about and hear more about that on the trailer that we have for the documentary we're going to make. But the next morning, with my daughter in jail, not being able to talk to her, I heard a voice. I don't hear voices often. It said, you're going to Richmond. That's it. And I thought, well, that could mean a lot of different things. And I thought to myself immediately, I'm going to get to go meet the governor and plead for my daughter's life. But it's interesting how God's uniquely prepared me, not that I've held government office, and no, it wasn't on my bucket list to be a government employee. But I'm willing to be a governor of Virginia, and I happen to know how to deal with big problems in government. I've worked with about a dozen different government agencies all over the globe. So the government of Canada became one of my largest customers, saved them $70 million because I give a second opinion on a migration of big software systems. They asked me to weigh in on their disaster recovery plans for nuclear suitcases. It wasn't a skill I had in my arsenal, but I knew where to find the experts, and we went in and did a good job for them. One of the most measurable successes is they came to me from Health Canada. It was in 2009. And they said, hey, we're ranked 32 in the world in healthcare. We know technology is the key. Help us with a roadmap. Well, we gave them not just a roadmap, but we designed their whole IT organization from the top down. We gave them the roadmap, and we looked a few years ago, and they had risen to number 2 in the world, behind Denmark. When it came time to look into the pandemic, I asked an expert, tell me about these masks. And he said, well, the problem is that the masks are measured in microns and the droplets are measured in nanometers. And so basically you can drive a truck through the holes in the mask if you're a viral droplet. And so I knew immediately that the mask wouldn't work. And then in terms of vaccinations, I don't trust the companies that are providing them, and I think people certainly have a right to choose whether or not they want medical care, except if it means to kill a baby. Then the baby doesn't get a choice, so I'm going to vote to protect the child. What I really need to tell you too, this is my chance to tell you on video, is what I found investigating election fraud. It's interesting, since I believe in the sovereignty of God, that I've been trying to make this video for about 6 months. And every single path has been blocked to where I really question the timing. And I see today that we're filming, so I think this is the right timing so that you today, as you consider my value as a potential leader or statesman for the state, what I actually know about elections. Virginia got a pass when we were scrutinizing all the states. Very few people were questioning Virginia, and of course, I was busy on a team investigating states that were considered the swing states. And as a result of doing my work, I was asked to help prepare a report that we delivered on January 5th, the day before the January 6th alleged insurrection that I think was staged, false flag event. And the reason it was staged is because the report that I helped build for Congress was threatening to the people in power, because we itemized in detail how the fraud played out in these different states. When the elections finished, I was just like most of you, commenting on Facebook and seeing how the recounts went and everything, and then realized that recounts, if you're recounting the false ballots, that doesn't tell you anything except that, yeah, you did a proper recount. What's needed is a forensic audit. And a forensic audit means you examine the evidence. You look at the ballots, and you look at the machines, and you look at the processes, and you look at the procedures, and you would look at the voting rolls. I wasn't liking what I was seeing and hearing, and I knew the courts would be blocking the attempts. And I asked an influential friend, I said, hey, can you get me connected to anybody? I'd like to volunteer to help, because I do have special skills after building a 5,000-page case file on my daughter's case, since she was charged with over 60 felonies. And he got me involved with the group, and I started helping. And the first thing they gave me was a spreadsheet with 2,400, roughly, names of people who had reported potential fraud or irregularities. And in it, I started finding immediately that one of the problems was people saying, that too many of them were saying, hey, I got there and they were showing I already voted. So I chose to focus on that trail a little bit. And if that sounds familiar, it's how they just rigged the elections in California. People with voter rolls, dead people, and having the voter rolls, and having loose voter ID laws, can go vote often. And when you extend the election into early voting, that's a multiplier for opportunities of fraud that just makes that particular vulnerability that much more vulnerable. In Philadelphia, Chicago, Houston, Boston, Detroit, Atlanta, these are places with lots and lots of claims of fraud that are just there to investigate. But I was focusing on some particular claims. And that's when I became aware that Mark Zuckerberg's donation of $300+ million to expand the polling locations in all these swing states created, again, what's called in the military terms an attack surface, a bigger opportunity for attack. And I knew that I was on the right track, again, because the propaganda media and corrupt people in government were saying that these were the safest elections in history. There was just too many points of compromise. They couldn't have reviewed all the machines. They couldn't have done a proper investigation. And I knew that that particular statement, that these are the safest elections in history, was just for the media and people who've already outsourced their thinking. These are just kind of narratives that aren't so. And so in Philadelphia, I found that I could obtain a voter list. I could have 80,000 names. I could go into these voting stations and vote. I thought this was going to break the case because I could go look at the video cameras, the security cameras, and I could see the people voting multiple times. Now, mind you, people were wearing masks, and these were the least safe elections ever in history. And I'll debate anybody, anytime, any place on that, gladly. I thought that finding the video cameras, we could prove it easily, and then we could, move on. There weren't any security cameras in any of the new Zuckerberg locations. And the reason is because the Republicans blocked it. You see, we've reached things where, in order to have the fraud at this level, I wasn't surprised on the 1960 elections, realizing how all this works, to find that Richard Nixon was the one who stopped the investigation when people suspected fraud in the 1960 election. You see, if you're going to pull off thefts of a national election, you got to have people in high places on both sides in order to do the cover-up. And Nixon did his job. He conceded, but when the reporter was going after the story in Chicago where, he was already writing articles about the 57 people who lived in one apartment that voted, and he was thinking he was going to get a Pulitzer Prize. He was called into Nixon's office, and when he refused to stop the investigation, Nixon called the newspaper and got it shut down. So you see, the people obstructing justice are the people who are in high places, and they're corrupt to the core. So what's going on today is that elections have been a big moneymaker. There's never been this audit. They've got the ballots guarded. They obstruct justice. There's prosecutors who should be taking on the investigations, and the reason I couldn't get anywhere in Philadelphia is that Larry Krasner is the district attorney in Philadelphia, and if you look, public record, George Soros paid $1.4 million into his campaign to position him in that city. And if you go around the country, in Virginia, you've got a prosecutor in Fairfax, and hundreds of thousands of dollars were paid by Soros, and Fairfax is where probably the fraud occurred. But the reason that you're going to have someone like me as governor to insist that we go look at this evidence is Virginia came up with something called virtual precincts and took all the voting, early voting, and all the absentee ballots and all the mail-in ballots and put it into these big groups of ballots. You can no longer look at voter turnout because they've lumped everything together. And voter turnout is where you can kind of quickly flag things like when there's a precinct and 110% of registered voters voted, right? All the people voted. That's where you can really spot fraud, but the way they did it in Virginia is it's like they made a fraud-friendly environment in the big counties. And I've worked personally on FOIA requests, getting information from big counties in Virginia, several counties, and looking at making sure that, yeah, they were benefactors of the Zuckerberg interference. Legal, I think, but there's no place for it. We need to make things like that better protected. So with virtual precincts, what we found just the other day, and working with some very bright people who do an analysis, one guy in particular, noticed following the data that the total on the website was 380,000 votes too high if you added up all the numbers that went into the total. Why was the Virginia certified number 380,000 votes? I think the number of votes in Fairfax that were questionable were 300,000 votes. That's enough to skew all the elections in Virginia. And so he started talking about it on social media, and all of a sudden that number changed on the website. And it was reduced. It was corrected quietly. So I know how to ask the right questions and get trusted people to make sure we get to the truth. You see, I just want to know the truth. And I think every freedom-respecting citizen needs to get on board with that concept. Let's find out who won. Because if people are tampering with things, we don't know who won. You see, it's intentional that I want to be a write-in candidate. And if you want to make sure that your vote counts, write in the other candidate, and it'll be counted manually. So I went to register early in the year and thought about, well, I'll get into the debates, I'll get my name known, and then I'll still run as an independent. And then it dawned on me again, once I became convinced that the elections were fraudulent, that I realized, well, I can't win. The only way I can win is to use the write-in ballot. And again, that's a long shot, but not if you realize in today's world of social media that I can affordably reach 3 million people if I have a viral video. Sidney Powell has all the extensive affidavits and testimony of people preserved who saw fraud, reported fraud, willing to testify under perjury of fraud, that the courts refused to hear. We wouldn't be in this situation if the courts had any type of interest in upholding justice, but they don't. I agree with Sidney Powell, who was just this week on media saying that we shouldn't spend any more money on elected officials because the elections are so rigged that these people are just raising money, and they have to know about it. That fraud's been going on for so long that anyone who's in office and is taking donations has to know that these are fraudulent elections and that money is basically a scam. And if you look at the race in Virginia, we have 2 millionaires who've raised millions of dollars from people that they think that they're voting to make a change. If the Republican wins in Virginia, it's going to put pressure on all the other audits to be shut down. That's what I anticipate is happening in this chess game. And all I ask is if you get a chance to ask Glenn Youngkin about his positions, before you make your list of questions, search for the Panama Papers and notice the ties between the Carlyle Group and the bin Laden family and George Soros, and look and see if the public record doesn't show that George Soros invested $100 million to get the Carlyle Group going. And then look at the fact that the Carlyle Group owns 100% of Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a consulting and contracting organization primarily to the federal government, primarily to intelligence agencies and defense industry. And in the ranks of their current employees are the people who were completely opposed to a sitting president during the last term. We're talking about Clapper and Brennan. And look at the other people that are part of Booz Allen Hamilton. So regarding the Democratic platform, I wanted to run as a pro-life Democrat because my heart's with a lot of social issues about helping people. And Terry McAuliffe is contaminated by his ties as a political hack to the Clintons and other things. So it's not hard to find objectionable things to McAuliffe, which brings us back to why I'm running. I mean, do you really like the choices that you have for governor? Terry McAuliffe's been governor before. He's got a track record that you can evaluate. So we sent a pardon request to McAuliffe, and we never got a reply, nor did the judge, one of the longest standing Democratic judges in Texas, didn't get the courtesy of a reply from McAuliffe. Not that McAuliffe wouldn't want to pardon our daughter. And if he's governor, I hope he'll rethink it, because I hope to have 3 million people who will be requesting it with me. You see, we had to keep quiet about our case. We were told to. It took 7 years to get to the point where we pretty much exhausted all of our options legally. And in the case of January 6th, I want to mention for the record that there's a fellow who recently died named John Anderson. And I want you to study his case and what happened, what the criminal justice system has done in Washington, both the local capital charges against him and then what the Department of Justice has done against John Anderson in his case. But to summarize it for you, he was basically there on January 6th when there was a push to really push past some lines at one point in the Capitol. He was standing in a place and was thrust in front of the police line. He got hit with chemicals that were sprayed toward the police. He got caught in the return fire from the officers, and he fell to the floor because he couldn't breathe. And they pulled him into the Capitol and revived him, and he acknowledges that the Capitol Police saved his life. And he was charged with entering the Capitol illegally. And so look at his sad case, because it's overreach of government, and it was related to the January 6th incident, where right now people are incarcerated in cruel and unusual ways, being held in solitary. And what's happening is most of them are being coerced to confess. I promise you that that's at the heart of the strategy. In the criminal justice system right now, there's fewer than 3% of cases ever make it before a jury. That system was rigged pretty much right after the Civil War, and they gave prosecutors the power to choose which cases are plea bargained or not. And of course, judges can always overrule a plea bargain. That happens rarely. But the prosecutor became the most powerful person in the criminal justice system from the Civil War on. And there's a trial penalty. If you want to go to trial, they threaten you, they blackmail you that they're going to hit you with more charges. They told Katie that she would never see her kids until they were grown with their own kids if she didn't go ahead and admit to these things. That's the type of blackmail and pressure that's used to pretty much shortcut justice and due process in our country. So Terry McAuliffe has a lot of baggage because of his association with the Clintons and Democratic parties, but if you look at his principles, I see socialism and other things that are unhealthy for the country. I particularly objected to his comment in the debate about parents really shouldn't get involved in what's being taught to their children. So I mentioned that a forensic audit had been done in this country. There had been zero when I was doing my work, but we finally have seen now that if you're going to really take an initiative, Arizona has been a model example of how to go after a forensic audit and how people are going to obstruct justice who are absolute traitors, in my opinion. And in the case of the Arizona audit, people are spinning things through the media, and it's because the audit is missing a couple of things that were withheld. So those people need to go to jail. So the big problem with the Arizona audit was people obstructing it, drawing it out, and actually withholding certain things, and then finding claims that ballots were destroyed and other things. I found that in my research in Georgia, that right after certain court decisions were made, people showing up doing things. These things need to be investigated. That's the bottom line, is we need to know what happened. We've got the tools, we've got the positions to do it, but all throughout our system right now, we've got judges, we've got prosecutors, and rather than helping for all these years without any audits before Arizona, you know, these people have made that possible by creating ballot blockades and not letting justice be pursued. There is a way to return to safe elections, and that is pretty much go to paper ballots, but also to have voter ID laws so that we can make sure that we know who's voting. And taking me back to the 1960s, I also came across all the evidence that Martin Luther King was killed by our deep state shadow government operators, and that James Earl Ray was really a patsy, much like Oswald and could have been just a patsy. Same thing with James Earl Ray, who was coerced to confess and then withdrew that coercion, and they used that against him and they convicted him and put him away. Well, a man came along named William Pepper, and he's written the books about it, and there's so much evidence that James Earl Ray was innocent that he actually had a mock trial. And they did a civil case for the King family. And in all instances, the evidence was so overwhelming that they agreed that James Earl Ray wasn't guilty as charged. And yet, the criminal justice system in Tennessee, because he developed some liver failure, they located a transplant. The surgery wasn't able to be performed in Tennessee, so they requested temporary move to Arkansas, and that was denied, and James Earl Ray died of liver failure in prison. Couldn't make it to get his transplant. Thus is the nature of the people who are who we stand opposed to as people who love freedom and respect our Constitution, and who appreciate all the blood that was shed to protect it. I mentioned earlier that I've met 5 billionaires, but I've actually followed one billionaire his entire career, and that's Bill Gates. Because of his shoddy software and products, he created an opportunity for me to travel the globe, warning people about the limitations of his products because they were being overpromised, oversold, and of course, that's what fraud's all about. But in the computer industry, there was people that were told that you can just hook up small machines and they're powerful enough to replace large machines. And there's a very shallow thought process to think that that's all there was. What he left out was the security. And Bill Gates is basically the father of the malware industry. And I've documented on one of the videos I've done about Bill Gates. It's a short video, but you can just look at the headlines I've accumulated of the attack surface that Microsoft products creates and all the compromises that have been building up over the years. And so I attribute him to the fact that there's a whole industry of vulnerable systems that are based on Microsoft technology, and he's just basically responsible. And everybody thinks because all the successful malware and viruses and things and ransomware are affecting Microsoft products, he's not the victim, he's responsible. And so I would travel, and IBM paid me to travel the world, multiple continents, over 50 events, IBM events I've spoken at. And all I did was share my research. And I'm an authority on my research. I know it better than anybody. I know my conclusions and opinions better than anybody. And I just presented it honestly. And my key main reference points are 14 projects that were failures, and the collective loss was $2.8 billion. This was in the 1990s, where there was a movement called downsizing and right-sizing. And I had a popular presentation called Downsizing, Right-Sizing, and Fantasizing. So I want to say hi, Bill. I'm still here, and look forward to bringing your name up more often now that people are looking to you for guidance on pandemics and other things. When we talked about pandemics, you can look at United Nations papers, you can look at work done by Bill Gates, you can look at things that have been happening at conferences over the last few years where this has been planned for a long time. And this is where China had to use it in order to eliminate the president who was stopping their spread of 5G technology around the globe. I've given you a lot of information. There's the China reports, the report that we were sending to conference, my daughter's book. There's so many things that we're willing to send you for free. So you won't be at a loss for things to read. I still have a lot of computer lectures on tape, and then you can use those if you have trouble sleeping. So to summarize, I started off asking for your vote as governor. I'd like to be a write-in candidate, and you would write Rev Bill Carico. But I think I can deliver more than that. I'm currently trying to line up a candidate to run for lieutenant governor. If we get 3 million people, let's go take out all top 3 spots. I have a lady who's going to be running for attorney general, and I'll be introducing her to you at the appropriate time. And right now, there's no need to muddy the waters. I need to hear from you. Give me your views on what I've talked about. Send us your questions, bc@x4.com. And let's start this dialogue about building a community. Now, if you get an email from anybody for the rest of your life from x4.com, if it's only a 2-letter email, you know that they're one of the founding members who's been proven and vetted to be somebody you can trust. So now that you've reached the end of this video with me, I want to ask you to help me out. And I want you to contact me and let me know your thoughts, needs, and concerns, because this is all about you. I've spent about $15,000 so far on these videos, all my campaign expenses. I'm going to rely on you to help and to go let people know and to take this opportunity. This is your moment to make a decision, and one that can really make a big impact. And even though it's a long shot, I think you can see that I believe in long shots because I believe in the God who I think is directing my steps. I hope you can come to that point of faith as well. Even if you don't, we have room where we can work together and fight off whoever wants to take us on. And they'll be taking on 3 million Virginians. We've never had that before, that kind of clout. That's why we're going to start a national movement, and this is a lot bigger than Virginia, but what a better place to start.